尊敬的各位专家、各位教育界的同仁们以及关心教育的朋友们，大家好！欢迎参加全球基础教育研究联盟第6届年会。今天上午将有7场围绕重新定义学习的报告，来自中国清华大学和英国剑桥大学2位教授将会给大家带来意义深远的主旨报告。5位来自中国、加拿大、丹麦、美国、俄罗斯的校长们将会给大家带来他们丰富的实践经验。Distinguished experts, honorable teachers and friends, nice to meet you all. Welcome to the 6th Annual Conference of the K-12 Education Research Association. For this morning's forum, we have 7 speeches focusing on redefining learning. 2 keynote speeches from Professor of Tsinghua University and Professor of Cambridge, and 5 principals from China, Canada, Denmark, the USA, Russia will share their practices in redefining learning. 首先，有请来自清华大学教育研究院院长、博士生导师石中英教授给大家带来主旨发言：一项学业失败恐惧的质性研究。First, let's welcome Shi Zhongying, Dean, Doctoral Supervisor of the Institute of Education, Tsinghua University, to give us a speech entitled The Qualitative Study on Students' Fear of Academic Failure.
大会主席、各位嘉宾、各位代表，大家好，我是清华大学教育研究院的石中英，非常高兴受邀参加全球基础教育研究联盟第6次的论坛。这次论坛的主题重新定义学习，我觉得非常重要，也特别具有时代特征。联合国教科文组织在2015年发布了一份报告，叫再思教育。在这份报告里边呢，对学习已经进行了一个重新的定义。主要的观点是，学习不仅仅是一种认知的行为，它也是一种态度、情感、价值的行为。学习不仅是一种个体的事情，也是一种集体的一个事情。那么我今天的报告的题目呢，就与 UNESCO 关于学习的这个重新定义有关。报告的主题是有关学生学业失败恐惧的。下面呢，我向大家分享一下我的 PPT。我的报告将从以下几个方面进行。第一，那么解释一下这项研究的背景。第二，说明一下研究的方法论。第三，报告研究的主要发现。第四呢，基于这些发现，那么提出6条教育的建议，供大家批评指正。大家常说失败是成功之母，那么失败呢，对于我们这些成人也是一个经常碰到的这么一个问题。那么对于成长中的中小学生而言，失败呢也是家常这个便饭。失败可以是成功之母，但失败呢也有可能是失败之母。那么怎么样来认识失败，才能够超越失败，最后取得成功？我想这是一个非常值得研究的问题。对于中小学生而言，那么在失败面前，他们究竟 采取一个什么样的态度，这也非常值得我们关注。日常学校生活的观察表明，中小学生在面对失败时，或多或少都存在着紧张、压抑，甚至恐惧的情绪。那么我们这个研究呢，就是研究中小学生的失败恐惧的。我们的研究采取的是知性研究的方法，我们选了2个北京市的初中的学校。那我们的样本是来自初中2年级的这个8名同学，有4名这个男同学4名女同学。我们研究的基本方法是进行个别访谈，也就是1对1的面对面的这种访谈。那么我们对访谈的结果加以匿名的记录，不记录访谈对象的名字。另外在访谈过程当中呢，这个如果学生出现比较严重的一些情绪障碍，访谈者呢还要进行这个心理的辅导。那么这也是我们知性研究伦理的要求。那么这是我们访谈的主要问题，包括就是了解学生学业失败的情况，以及他对学业失败的态度和体验。另外也请同学们来分享这个导致失败恐惧产生的原因。那么请他们来分析失败恐惧与老师、家长、同学态度之间的关系。我们还想了解呢，学校或者是教师对学生的失败恐惧所给予的一些指导和支持的情况。这些问题呢，是我们访谈当中所关注的主要的问题。当然，访谈过程当中，随着访谈的进行，有的时候我们也会提出另外一些相关的更加具体的这样一些问题。总的来说，我们的研究呢，是要通过访谈描述学生学业失败的体验，寻找导致学生学业失败恐惧的原因。那么最后呢，想提出有关怎么样来指导学生对待学业失败恐惧的一些教育建议。我们的研究发现呢，学业失败恐惧在访谈对象那里确实是广泛存在的。那么8位访谈对象，大概有7位这个在访谈中表示他们确实有这种恐惧的体验。那么比如说当我们问在考试前是否会出现紧张害怕的情绪时，一个女生就说，她说肯定还是会有紧张或者害怕，比如害怕自己一下子名次掉得太多而且她报告呢，这种害怕在考试前1周就容易出现。那么另外一位女生就这个报告呢，那么上台背诵课文的时候，她特别容易紧张，容易害怕，有的时候会出现大脑空白这样的一种体验。明明都准备得很好的这个背诵的内容，在那一瞬间全部被忘掉，这使他感到非常紧张。那么有一个男生也报告说呢，这个存在这个考试失败的恐惧，那么甚至会出现因为恐惧出现晚上睡觉不踏实，那么这样的一种现象。那么另外一位男生也确认，这个在考试之前比较容易出现紧张的心理，那么心跳容易这个加快，那么在拿到卷子那一刻有大难临头的感觉。所以通过这样的一些这个报告呢，我们可以 得出一个观点说呢，在中学生中间呢，这个学业失败的恐惧是真实客观存在的。那么大部分同学都有这样的恐惧的体验。我们的研究呢，还致力于去分析失败恐惧的种类，那么看看学生的学业失败恐惧是否主要就集中在学业上。那么我们的发现是，考试失败恐惧这是最基本的，但是学生的学业失败恐惧不完全都是这个考试失败恐惧，它波及到学生学校生活的方方面面。比如说这位女生她也报告说，除了考试呢，其他的一些情景当中也会出现失败恐惧，出现这种慌乱感。当然她说其他的这种恐惧比较轻比如说担心在体育比赛当中不能取得好成绩等等。那么还有个女生，除了报告有考试失败恐惧以外，她还有一个恐惧，就是怕自己长胖。她对身体的这个形状的变化，那么也有一种恐惧感。那么还有一位女生报告，她有人际关系的这种恐惧，那么害怕自己的好朋友那么离开自己。她甚至认为呢，这种恐惧比考试失败的恐惧，那么对自己的心理和精神的影响，那么要更大更深。那么基于这样的一些资料呢，这个我们发现，在中学生当中的学业失败恐惧，确实是有很多种类型。这里既包括学业成绩失败恐惧，还包括人际交往失败恐惧、社团任务完成失败恐惧、素养展示失败恐惧、班级选举失败恐惧，以及外在形象的失败恐惧等等。我们在访谈中发现呢，学生的学业失败恐惧，他的恐惧的程度体验的深度，这个是不一样的。那么有的比较轻有的比较重，这个有的就表现为一种紧张或者是慌乱，但是有的呢就表现的这个非常严重了。像有一位男生就报告说，这个严重的时候呢，他会感觉到手脚发麻，快没有知觉了。他说如果这种情况总是发生的话，他会否定自己，会产生一种坏情绪，觉得自己是个废物甚至产生了不想活下去的那种念头。可见对于失败恐惧的程度那么非常深。所以根据这样的一些访谈资料呢，我们把中学生学业失败恐惧的水平分为3个程度。一个是强烈恐惧就是恐慌它的表现就是不仅有生理反应，像头晕、四肢麻木、僵硬、身体僵硬等等，甚至会出现不想活了以及绝望的一些念头。那其次有中等的恐惧，表现为害怕，也会有一些生理上的反应，比如说心跳加速出汗等等。那么轻度呢，就表现为紧张。所以中学生的学业失败恐惧，它会表现出从一般性的紧张到中等的害怕，以及到强度很高的这种绝望，那么这样不同的水平。那么对于失败恐惧的产生的因素，我们也通过访谈资料的分析呢，那么做了一些研究。其中呢，这个有学生报告说，失败恐惧呢一开始会有但是后来呢就习惯了。那么这地方实际上就谈到随着失败的频次的这种增加，那么他可能就适应了这种失败最后就有了 有了心理的惯性、心理的适应性啊，这可能是一种这个影响失败恐惧程度的原因。另外就是还谈到，那么他者的态度是影响失败恐惧的重要因素。这里边的重要他人就包括老师、家长、同学等等。那么有个同学特别报告呢，就是老师的态度，那么对于他们失败恐惧的产生至关重要。如果老师把自己当成是发泄的工具，那么自己就感觉到特别的无助，那么对失败的恐惧呢就会加深。另外我们也发现呢，在学生失败恐惧产生的过程当中，老师家长的态度或者情绪非常重要。也就是说，如果老师表现得很紧张，那么同学们就会加倍的紧张；如果父母表现得很紧张，那么孩子们就表现得加倍的紧张。所以从这个角度来说呢，失败恐惧可能跟成年人对学生学业失败的态度有着非常直接的关系。比如说，有一位学生这个报告，他爸爸呢就是一个对学生的学业，对他自己的学业失败高度紧张的这么一个人，对于学生学业成绩的不良表现，那么父亲的态度那么非常负面啊，非常的消极，那么这也加重了他对于学业失败的恐惧。其中有一个学生这个报告自己的失败恐惧呢比较轻啊，那么原因就是跟他父亲的这个态度有关系。那么每一次他考砸了，那么父亲也都会跟他说没有关系，没有关系哈，我们再分析问题，然后下一次争取能够比这一次要好一些。所以我们看到呢，在中学生学业失败恐惧产生的过程当中，重要他人像家长和老师的态度，那么是一个关键变量。那么根据我们的分析呢，影响学生失败恐惧产生的因素可以分为两大类：自身因素和外界因素。那么自身因素呢，就包括学业基础既往的失败经验、他的人格类型和他的能力，以及他的人生规划人生规划呢，有一些资料表明呢，这个学生对未来有明确人生规划的这样的学生，失败的恐惧呢来的要更强烈一些。对未来没有什么设想的，那么他的失败恐惧呢就要轻一些。那么外界因素就包括他参与学习任务的重要性程度以及失败所引发的后果，教师的影响、家庭的影响，以及参与完成任务他参与的频率等等，这些都是影响失败恐惧的外界的因素。我们的研究呢，想通过访谈来了解学生到底是怎么看待这个失败恐惧是想去把握失败恐惧的这个本质特点到底是什么。我们的问题是，你为什么会如此担心自己失败那么同学们有各种各样的报告那么总的来说呢，他们担心的不是失败本身，而是失败所引发的一些不确定的一些后果比如有的同学会担心失败了，同学们表面上不说什么，心理上看不起自己担心影响这种同学关系。那么有的同学呢，担心失败了就不被大家所认可，大家认为自己呢是一个没有什么本事的人。当然最多的是担心失败了，担心家长的责备担心家长生气发怒对自己绝望说一些非常伤面子伤尊严的话那么还有一些人，有些同学是担心失败了会被同学们嘲笑，会被老师看不起所以从这些资料来看呢，那么失败恐惧本身 当然是由失败所引发的，但不是对失败的恐惧，而是对失败所产生的可能的后果的恐惧。所以我们经过分析以后认为呢，失败恐惧的实质是被比较以后带来的心理距离与压迫感，是基于强烈的自尊心以及所产生的对存在感、价值感和意义感的异常珍视，那么就害怕呢失败威胁到自己的存在感，威胁到自己的价值感，也由此威胁到自己的意义感。那么失败恐惧呢，是对孤独感、虚无感的强烈拒绝与摆脱。失败恐惧也是希望成功的另外一种表现。那么归根结底说呢，这个失败恐惧是对失败后一系列后续反应的恐惧，而非失败本身，或者是对自己的这个恐惧。那么失败恐惧的根源在哪呢？那表面上来看，它是有一些具体事件所引发的，比如说成绩排名的下降、班委的落选、好朋友的离开、社团任务没有完成、父母的斥责、教师的失望等等。那么根本的原因是什么呢？我们发现失败恐惧是被人为制造出来的，失败不应该导致恐惧。那么但是失败恐惧的产生实际上是社会比较的结果，是考试制度与排名制度的衍生品，是面子文化、比较文化的衍生品。它反映了教育价值取向的异化，反映了对学业失败的不宽容，也是优质教育资源匮乏和激烈的竞争这个环境所导致的结果。那么我们也想了解一下，面对比较普遍的学业失败恐惧，学校里做过一些什么辅导或者支持性的工作没有？那么学生们普遍反映，这个没有在这个课堂里直接讨论过失败恐惧问题。那么班级的主题呢，主题活动也没有讨论过这样的问题。我们问他们呢，你们愿不愿意有失败恐惧的时候去找这个心理咨询老师？那么他们也多数表示，那么不愿意去找心理咨询老师，那么也害怕自己的这种失败恐惧，那么被别人所知道，这个成为别人呢这个嘲笑自己那么一个缘由。基于上面的这些研究呢，那么我们这个课题组提出6点的建议供学校的校长、老师以及家长们那么来参考。第一条建议就是，教育者应对学生的失败恐惧给予积极的关注。那么过去呢，可能我们过于关注他的学业表现但是我们对学习者本身的学习状态，特别是学习情绪体验，我们关注的不够。那么显然，频繁的这个失败恐惧会给学生造成极大的心理压力，会影响他们学习的投入那么会对他们的长期发展那么带来不利的影响。所以呢，我们第一条建议就是希望教育者不管是老师还是家长或者其他这个相关的人员，能够关注到学生失败恐惧这样一种心理或者是情绪的体验。第二呢，教育者应帮助学生正确对待失败以及失败恐惧。失败呢，确实它是一个指针，它表证着我们在知识、能力、态度、价值观的某些方面的不足，或者是针对某些任务的完成，那么学生的心理素质和能力方面的不足，才产生失败。失败从教育学的角度来说， 它应该激起我们更加努力、刻苦学习，那么这样一种意愿。那么恐惧呢，是无助于我们走出失败的阴影的。所以失败恐惧虽然它是一种自然的这样的一种生理或者心理的反应，但是它更应该成为我们未来学习的一种方向的这样的一个指针。第三一个呢，就是教育者要关注学生过去的失败经历与恐惧感。那么由于学生的失败恐惧那么它会持续到学生学习的整个过程，所以教育者需要了解这些学生在过去的学习过程当中有哪些失败恐惧的体验，他们自己又是如何来处理这种失败恐惧的。那么从失败恐惧当中他们学到了什么，我觉得这些呢都是我们需要来高度关注的。特别要防止的是失败恐惧日积月累，那么会导致学生自我的否定性的评价使他们不能够很好的悦纳自己，甚至他们对自己深表失望，对未来也感到灰心丧气。所以我们要关注学生过去的失败经历与恐惧感，关注他们过去的失败经历与恐惧感对他们学习和发展的长期的影响。第四一点呢，就是教育者要努力营造安全、愉快、全纳的学习环境。那么不要因为一次、两次、三次、四次学业的失败，那么对学生的认同与接纳，对学生的人际关系等等，那么造成一定程度的威胁。我们要像第一次见到学生一样接纳那些有失败恐惧的所有的学生，使他们感觉到恐惧并不会，失败恐惧或者失败本身并不会带来比较严重的心理社会认同等方面的后果，消除失败恐惧产生的这种环境的不良因素。第五呢，那么教育者要指导学生对严重的失败恐惧给予治疗。我们发现失败恐惧有不同的水平或者叫程度，那么有的失败恐惧已经到了比较严重的程度，那么对于这样的一些学生呢，我们应该及时的甄别并且呢指导他们去看学校的心理教师那么跟家长配合，那么帮他们消除产生这种严重的失败恐惧的这样一种心理状况使得他们能够有轻松的学习生活、校园的这种人际交往。最后一条建议，也是最重要的一个建议，就是教育者、管理者和决策者应该对学校当中的精英主义的文化以及不合理的教育评价制度要进行反思。我们的研究发现呢，失败恐惧都是被比较的结果，是把这个同学的失败和别的同学的成功那么进行比较的结果。我们应该确立每一个学生都有他内在的价值，每一个学生都有自己关于未来美好生活的想象，每一个学生只要给予他充分的时间和有效的指导，他们都能够不断的取得成长和进步。我们要克服以单一的分数来评价所有学生发展状况的这么一种传统的制度我们要构建更加多样的学生发展的评价的制度体系，让每一个学生看到自己身上的闪光点。那么这样的话呢，他就不会因为一次两次那么学业失败而对自己产生一些负面的情绪。好的，那么现在呢大家都在谈 这个教育应当以学习者为中心。我觉得这个理念是非常正确的。那么在这个理念的指导下，我们就应该深入的研究学习者，研究学习者的学习行为，研究学习者在学习过程当中所可能产生的各种各样的失败恐惧，以及他对学习行为本身的影响。那么这个研究呢，这是一个初步的研究，那么希望对各位的工作和研究呢能够有所启示。谢谢大家，我的报告就到这里。
谢谢石中英教授的精彩报告，希望学生学业恐惧引起大家的重视，并在我们的日常工作中积极帮助学生克服恐惧，享受学习。Thank you, Professor Shi. Now let's welcome Jeffrey Hayward, Professor of Education in Cambridge University, to give us another keynote speech entitled Creatively Redefining Teaching and Learning. 接下来有请剑桥大学教育学院教授杰夫·海沃德给大家带来主旨报告：创造性的重新定义教育学。
Hello everybody, my name is Jeff Hayward. I'm a Professor of Education at the University of Cambridge, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to give this keynote presentation. I need to tell you a little bit about myself and my background so you can understand what I'm going to say next. I started my academic career 45 years ago as a doctoral student in the Faculty of Zoology at the University of Oxford. So I started my life as a research biologist. I became a postdoc at the University of Liverpool, and it was there that I began to realise that I needed to work with young people rather than carrying on working with statistical models. So I left academia at that point, and I became a teacher in a tertiary college teaching 14 to 19-year-olds science. And it was then that I began to realise that many young people struggled to understand the science that I was teaching them, and I became therefore absolutely focused on what I had to do as a teacher in terms of my teaching to support the learning of my students. Subsequently, I moved back to the University of Oxford as a teacher educator, a science teacher educator, and I came across the challenge there of beginning teachers who defined their teaching or their beginning teaching in terms of what had worked for them at school, normally trying to copy their favourite teacher at school, and expecting that because they had learnt science effectively using that methodology, that it would work for all of the learners they had in their classrooms. And they were very shocked when they found that it didn't, and the normal response was to blame the young people rather than what they were doing. So one of the things that we had to do was to help them to creatively redefine what teaching and learning was actually about, which we did with the help of very skilled teachers working in the schools that we used for initial teacher education. Subsequently, I left Oxford and went to the University of Leeds, where I was the head of school, and then I came to the University as head of faculty, University of Cambridge as head of faculty. So I've spent the last 10 years of my life involved in educational management, and that is where my main interests now lie. Now, over the course of my academic career, I have been extremely fortunate in being able to travel all around the world. And I've visited classrooms in, I believe, now 15 different countries, including China. And one of the things I find interesting is wherever I go in the world, this is what I find. a curriculum for secondary schools which is essentially based upon this kind of a model. So we have a number of subjects, maths, Chinese, history, geography, science, English, and so on, which are being taught in schools. And this is the same pattern I see everywhere in the world, whether that be China, whether that be Australia, whether that be Kenya or Canada or wherever. This is what I observe. And this is defended, this type of curriculum model, as a liberating education, by which people mean that this is a mode of education, a curriculum, which will liberate young people from their common sense understandings of the world. And it is seen as an induction into the best that has been thought and said. So we're introducing young people to really important ideas, important concepts, whether that be in mathematics, in science, in literature, history, geography, or art. Michael Oakeshott would have described this as an initiation into the conversation between the generations of humankind. And I think that is an exemplary conception of what the purpose of education actually is. It's about helping us to understand our common human history. And in the hands of someone like Michael Young, this type of curriculum is described as providing access to what he terms powerful knowledge. The knowledge is powerful in the sense that it is liberating. It liberates you from the everyday, your everyday experiences, and takes you beyond those. And it's also powerful in the sense that this is the language, this is the knowledge that powerful people, the people who run our countries, have gained as they have gone through the education system, and it is this type of knowledge which is seen as being the most important for young people to develop. At the same time, I hear something different. I hear people all over the world saying, no, 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 no. This is a backward-looking traditional curriculum for the 19th century. And there is a grain of truth in that. This model of the curriculum was largely developed in Europe and the United States during the 19th century. The type of curriculum that young people would have been exposed to before that time actually looked quite different to this. So this is quite a recent invention. And the same people will very often say, well, what we now need is 21st century skills. So we need a curriculum that will deliver 21st century skills, which will make people ready to go to work and able to cope with the difficulties and challenges of the 21st century. And what I want to look at first is why we see this shift in the way some people are talking about the school curriculum, away from this model of powerful knowledge that you can see on the screen to this idea of 21st century skills. And to do that, I'm going to use this man whose name is Ezra Solomon. He is a Burmese-American economist. He passed away in 2002, and he works most of his adult life in the United States. And this is a particular quote of his which I like. He's saying the only function of economic forecasting is to make astrology look respectable. And what he's saying is that despite all the powerful mathematical tools which look unbelievably precise that economists have to imagine the future, actually their forecasts are nearly always wrong, which makes astrology look respectable. And for any of us who lived through the financial crisis of 2008 to 2010, you can appreciate the sentiment. Most economists did not see that crisis coming. So, what some people interpret by what Solomon is saying is that the world is becoming more unpredictable, and that we must react to that unpredictability and change the nature of schooling. Well, I'm afraid I don't agree with that. I think it's wrong. The physics and chemistry of the world are entirely predictable. So the world as a physical system is pretty predictable. We know that the Earth is spinning on its axis, and it will continue spinning on its axis until such time as the sun explodes as a red giant in a few billion years' time. Obviously, sometimes the outcomes of those physical processes may be less predictable, like the weather, but with the advent of very fast computers, we are getting better and better and better at predicting the weather as well. So it's not the physical systems of the world that are becoming less predictable and which make economic forecasting like astrology. It is social life which is becoming more unpredictable. And we only have to reflect on the changes that have taken place in practically all societies in the world over the last 200 years to realize just how much social change there has actually been. 200 years ago, most of us would have died where we were born. We would have been educated at home, not at school. And we probably would have had at best limited literacy and numeracy. What we would have learnt at home is how to do the job, probably the same job that your father or your mother did. Now, as social life has become more complicated, and the advent of technology is making it even more complicated, what we see is the rise of what are called ambiguous problems. And ambiguous problems are the sorts of problems that can't be resolved by means-ends rationality, which was the kind of problem solving I was doing as a research scientist. I could construct a statistical model, I could put the input in, and I would know what the output was going to be. That's means-ends rationality. The kinds of problems that we are increasingly facing in the world are not like that. They do not have simple solutions, if they have any solutions at all. You only have to think about issues such as the climate crisis, the pandemic, and so on to see the kind of ambiguous problems that we're facing. And it is the rise of these ambiguous problems which I think lies behind the discourse of 21st century skills, which normally has a kind of list like this of creativity, problem solving, team working, and communication. And my colleagues in Europe call these types of skills transversal competencies. And what they mean by this is that if you learn something in one context, you can then transfer that to a second context. And it's worth thinking about that just for a while. Chess players are very good at solving problems in chess. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're good at solving economic problems or solving political problems or solving social problems. They're good at solving chess problems because they're very knowledgeable about chess. That doesn't make them knowledgeable about anything else. It makes them knowledgeable about chess. And the idea that we can teach young people how to problem solve in a particular context and that will then transfer to a completely different context needs to be questioned. We shouldn't just accept that. Now, I want to focus for the moment on the concept of creativity. And I want to argue that creativity is fundamental to being a human being. Indeed, being creative is to be human. I'm going to do that using 3 examples from history. The first is this extraordinary image, which is on a cave wall in Sulawesi in Indonesia. It's 35,000 years old. And the image has been produced by a person holding their hand against a wall, filling their mouth with paint in a form of ochre, a form of mud suspended in water, and then blowing that paint around their hand. Now, people will say, well, anybody could do that. That's not particularly creative. The point is, this person did it. And what this person is saying is, I am here. This was me. This is my identity. And that person knows that in the future, people will look at this and know that they were there. And that sort of projection of yourself into the future seems to me to be an important aspect of creativity. The second is something which most people would associate with being creative. This particular image is about 15,000 years old. It's a piece of reindeer horn, so reindeer are big deer with great big antlers on their heads. And the person has used a little bit of those antlers to make this quite exquisite carving. It's about 15 centimeters long. And what you can see is two reindeer. Here's one of them, and the second reindeer is there, and they're swimming across a river. And this is exactly how reindeer behave. They swim in procession across rivers in northern Europe and Russia. And this would have been carved by, not by an artist, but by just an ordinary person who would have done it probably around the campfire in the evening as a means of keeping themselves occupied and being that very human thing of being creative. And this is just beautifully observed. This is exactly what reindeer do when they swim across rivers, and you can see how carefully this person has observed the reindeer and then carved them into this bone, probably in an evening around a campfire or something like that. And we would recognize that as being a distinctly human thing to do. And my third example is a bit more recent. This is about 4,500 years old. Again, it's in the British Museum, and it's a bronze bell. It would have been made not by a single person, but by a group of people in a prototype of factory. But again, it is an artifact that has been designed. It hasn't happened by accident, and you can see the beautiful ornate decoration that's been put on here, which is about somebody being proud and trying to express their creativity through the form of this bell, which could simply have been plain and it would still have worked as a bell. Right? But again, it's this process of creativity. So here's a question. If, as I'm arguing, creativity is essentially human, and to be human is to be creative, why are we worried about creativity? Well, I think part of the argument lies here. Now, I normally give this photograph to my first year undergraduates at Cambridge and ask them to work out what they're looking at. And normally it takes them about 5 minutes to realise that what they're looking at is a classroom. And this is a classroom from ancient Sumeria, which is in southern Iraq in the Middle East. And it is about 5,500 years old, and it is the oldest known classroom. It's not the oldest classroom, because there may be classrooms that we can't see anymore, but it's the oldest known. And one of the reasons we know about it is because it's made out of stone. I'm pretty certain, for reasons that I'll come to in a minute, that similar classrooms would have existed in China at about this time period. But they would have been made of wood, and they've either burnt down or they've rotted away, so we can't actually see them. And you can see it looks eerily like a modern classroom. This is a very powerful technology that's existed for 5,500 years, and it's quite difficult to change. So there's a big space at the front here, which is where the teacher would have done their stuff. They would have performed the lesson, as teachers still often do today. And the students would have been sat on these stone benches, and they would all have been young boys. This was a school for boys. And they would have been looking forward at the teacher. And the only thing that's really majorly different from a modern classroom, okay, it doesn't have projectors and PowerPoint and all those kinds of things, are these strange structures on the floor, these oval structures on the floor, and I'll come back to those in a minute. So the question then is, well, if this is a classroom, what were the young people learning? And actually, this is a school for scribes, and what they're learning is how to do this. This is the ancient Sumerian written script, which is known as cuneiform. And what the boys are learning to do is how to make these marks on clay tablets using a little reed stylus. So they've got a soft clay tablet and they're pressing the reed stylus in to make these marks. Now they're learning to do this not to produce great literature or poetry, but to keep records and send messages. They're going to become scribes. And scribes were immensely powerful in the ancient Sumerian and ancient Egyptian courts, and I suspect also in the ancient Chinese courts as well, because they were the people who could turn spoken language into written language, which could then be transmitted from one place to another place, or could be used to keep records of things like the amount of beer in the cellars of the king's palace, the number of arrows they had, the number of soldiers, and do tax and so on and so forth. So this is an immensely powerful role. This is a vocational school, and the reason why they had to go to school is they cannot learn this new skill, this newly invented skill. They cannot learn it at home because their mums and dads are illiterate. So they have to go to a special place where they can be taught this new writing in order to take on the role of a scribe. And what really matters is accuracy. Accuracy, accuracy, accuracy. You do not want inaccurate messages being sent out. You do not want your record keepers to be creative. And if you think about it, creativity is something we should only value under certain circumstances. I don't want my aeroplane pilot to be creative in thinking about how he's going to land or she's going to land the aeroplane. I want them to follow the rules and I want them to be accurate. So there's nothing wrong with being accurate. The problem is that accuracy becomes everything. Now, this is the point that Sir Ken Robinson, who was an amazing man, unfortunately no longer with us, his TED talk on creativity, I believe, is the most watched TED talk in the history of TED Talks. And he talked very wisely about issues to do with education and creativity. He was originally an art teacher. And there are three things which he said over the course of the years, which I particularly have picked out. First is we don't grow into creativity, we grow out of it. In other words, he's saying we're naturally creative. But what happens is that schooling gets in the way. The way that we school people with that curriculum of powerful knowledge, it still favours accuracy, and we're educating people out of creativity. And accuracy is favoured because it enables you to do well in high-stakes assessments. And we know that high-stakes assessments are essential for making progress into the best universities. And parents want their children to do well on those tests. And accuracy is key. The second thing is that that type of school curriculum values being right. You need to get the right answer to the question in the exam if you're going to get a good grade on the exam. But being creative means most of the time you're going to be wrong. And Robinson is saying here is you've got to allow people to be wrong, otherwise they're never going to come up with anything original. So if we're going to have creativity as part of the school curriculum, we have to find spaces where young people can be wrong, and that's celebrated, not castigated. And he thinks that's important because our task should be to educate our students' whole being so that they can face the future. Not just this narrow subset of mathematics, science, geography, but their whole person. The purpose of education is to make us more human. Now, I think that's right, and I agree with those sentiments entirely, but we mustn't do what is happening here, which is to throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a German woodcut from the middle of the 16th century, so obviously they had the idea a long time ago. And the baby here is useful knowledge, things that young people really do need to know, And the water is all the other stuff we have in the curriculum that perhaps we don't need anymore. But we need to think carefully about that. So what I'm saying is that it's not just a case of simply saying, let's get rid of everything and start again. We have to build on what we know already, and we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. So this is the situation that we're in. We have a kind of binary situation. On the one hand, we have this powerful knowledge curriculum, or perhaps a traditional curriculum of the 19th century, whichever way you want to think about it. On the other hand, we have the proposals for a new school curriculum based on 21st century skills, which includes things like creativity, problem solving, teamworking, and communication. And the extreme argument is that we should substitute the 21st century skills curriculum for this curriculum, which was based upon powerful knowledge. And my argument is that is throwing the baby out with the bathwater. But this binary does present teachers and school leaders with a major problem. This is obviously Edward Munch's famous painting, The Scream. And I first confronted this problem of what should I teach when I was a young teacher in the tertiary college, because this 21st century skills idea was just becoming ascendant. And that's how I felt. What should I do under this set of circumstances? My professional identity and the professional identity of most secondary school teachers is based in their knowledge of subjects. That's what gives them their professional identity. And we're being asked to sweep all of that away and focus on things like creativity, problem solving, teamworking, and communication, which most of us would not have been trained to teach. So we'd have to learn it all over again and develop a new professional identity. In addition, we know that the curriculum is a zero-sum game. So if we're going to do 21st century skills, we have to lose some of the content that we're teaching because there won't be enough time to teach it all. And that's a major issue. My own view is that most of the secondary school curriculum has got too much content in it, and we could find space to do other things. It's a question of how you do it. But this is what Gregory Bateson, the famous psychologist, would have called a classic double bind. And by that he meant whatever you do, it will be wrong. So if you choose to do 21st century skills, get rid of that. I can guarantee you'll have parents complaining because they will say, but our children have to pass these very, very strict exams like the Gaokao, for example, or A-levels in the context of the United Kingdom. And to do that, they need this powerful knowledge. So why are you teaching them this? And the young people will react pretty unfavorably to it as well. So one of my first attempts to develop a curriculum where we had both knowledge and 21st century skills, and that's what I'm going to go on to in a minute, happened when I was about 2 or 3 years into my teaching career in the tertiary college, and I'd been given the task of designing a new course for young people who hadn't done very well in school, in science. And we worked on the idea that what we needed to do was to build their confidence up for the first month or so. So we gave them lots of tasks to do, lots of problem-based learning, and they really enjoyed what they were doing. And we could see as teachers they were learning lots and lots of things. And after about 2 or 3 weeks of this, one of the young men in my class came up to me and said, Dr. Hayward, he said, I've really enjoyed what you've done with us for the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but when are you going to teach us something? And of course, what that young man meant was, when am I going to deal with the powerful knowledge curriculum? Because he had a model of what learning in school was, and it was the powerful knowledge. It wasn't the skills-based curriculum. On the basis of that, we actually changed what we did. So we made sure we kept on telling young people what they were learning, and that's important. All right, so where we find ourselves in then is this classic double bind, and what I want to spend the rest of my talk doing is trying to explain a way out of this double bind, which doesn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And to do that, we need to use something which Uriel Engerstrom calls an expansive learning cycle. So we have, or rather I have, questioned what is happening where we have these two forms of curriculum, one which is based very firmly in knowledge and subjects, and another which is based upon the idea of developing 21st century skills. I have seen that as a kind of need state, and my analysis leads me to the suggestion that we are in a double bind. Whatever we do, it's going to be wrong. We're going to upset somebody. And therefore, what we need to do is to model a new solution and examine and test the new model. So that's the process of breakthrough. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'm going to show you how I think you can actually get out of the double bind. But then I want to talk about this, resistance. What happens when you try to implement a new model and the issues that raises. So to start with, I'm going to look at a project which is called Thinking Science. You can find this on the web. It was undertaken by two English academics, Philip Adey and Michael Shea, in the 1980s. So it's about 40 years old. Just because it's 40 years old doesn't mean it's not good. And this intervention, it's a science intervention, consists of 30 lessons over 2 years. And it's for 11 to 13-year-olds. So these are young people who are a long way away from high-stakes tests. So this is the best opportunity you have in the English system to implement something which isn't about teaching content. So this is a task-based, not a content-based approach. This is not about teaching about chemical reactions or the physics of force. It's about getting young people to think. And they get the thinking done by giving them a series of tasks. And I'm going to show you one of these tasks in a minute. So the teacher's role is radically different. They set the initial scene, which normally takes about 5 minutes in a 40-minute lesson. And then the students work in small groups and the teacher steps back. So they work in small groups, the students, and then they give feedback back to the rest of the class. And then the teacher has a role in helping them to think about how what they've learned through this process will generalize to other contexts and other processes. And there's exercises to enable them to do that. So the teacher asks questions. They do not instruct. And that is quite alien for most teachers. The idea of not being in charge, of not transmitting information, is quite an alien concept. And it's hard work because you have to think on your feet and respond to what the young people are doing and asking questions. You're not sitting in a corner reading a book. What you're doing is you're going around all the time, listening carefully and making suggestions through asking questions. Because what you're trying to do is to get the young people to think about their own thinking. The approach is extraordinarily well grounded in learning theory, possibly the best science intervention that I know. And it's a metacognitive approach that improves critical thinking. We know it improves critical thinking. We've got assessments which show it improves critical thinking. The evidence is really hard. And then very surprisingly, it raises exam performance. So it's not about teaching content, it's about getting young people to think about their own thinking, metacognition, but what that does is it improves their performance in high stakes tests. So that's the approach. So here's an example of it. It's not rocket science. Right? The tasks are actually relatively simple. So this one is called the FAIR test, and what you're giving young people is a series of pipes. So there are two types of materials. There's copper pipes, the sort you use in domestic plumbing, and the plastic pipes you also use in domestic plumbing. And these come in different diameters. There's no 32mm copper pipe, but you get 32mm plastic type. And we give them different lengths of pipe of different materials and different diameters. So they're all in a tray together, mixed up. And the question is, what affects the pitch of the note that the pipes produce when you strike them on the table or you strike them on your hand? This is not about teaching the physics of sound. It's about helping young people to think through how they undertake an experiment in science. And what this does is it recreates the mode of pedagogic communication. So in this space, this is a space for transmission pedagogy. The teacher stands at the front, instructs the class, and then the class will copy what they're doing. So as a science teacher, I have seen again and again and again a science teacher standing at the front of a classroom dictating something to students, which they're then writing down. And by and large, they use that special neural mechanism that goes from their ears to their hands without going through their brain. I.e., they write it down, but they don't understand what they've written down. And we move to a space for dialogic pedagogy, where young people are working and talking. So if you walk into one of the thinking science classrooms, it's a noisy place because young people are talking to each other and they're talking with their teacher. This is a teacher here. And this is my colleagues at University of Cambridge who work in the Centre for Dialogic Research, and they have tried this approach all over the world with enormous success, and I've seen it being used in China as well. It's not that I'm saying we only need spaces for dialogic pedagogy and we don't need transmission pedagogies. That's not the case. We need both, but they need to be used wisely and thoughtfully. But what thinking science does, and you can see the kind of idea here, is it creates a space for dialogic pedagogy where children are trying things out. And quite often they're wrong. And they say, oh, we got that wrong. Let's have another go. So you would think that something like that, which is proven to work in terms of developing metacognitive skills and is proven to work in terms of raising examination performance, you would find it in every single English secondary school. In fact, you'll find it in practically none. And the reason why is because of this. As we try to implement that model, a model that works on the basis of research evidence, it meets resistance. And the commonest form of resistance is this. I've got too much content to cover to use this approach. I cannot waste 30 lessons in which I could have been teaching content to develop children's thinking skills, even though it raises examination performance. And there's an element of truth in that. I think there is too much content in most of the secondary school curricula I see around the world. And politicians like lots of content, by and large. So that's one reason. And there's a grain of truth in it, but there's a lot of other stuff that's going on there as well. Partly to do with people's identities as teachers, which means this is how I really like to teach, and I don't really like to teach in this other way, because I don't feel in control. And this is the sort of thing I would hear from new teachers. And this came from an experience I actually had in a Chinese primary school, where a fantastic expert maths teacher had given a demonstration lesson with all the young teachers observing with the class, in which she had got children to do a particular computation in about 20 different ways. And they'd come up with all sorts of new ways of doing this particular computation, which clearly showed that they actually understood the mathematics. And I went back to the same school a few weeks later, and I saw a newly qualified maths teacher who was trying to do this kind of a lesson, and she had a really good go at it. She basically was able to mimic what the expert teacher had done, and then she set the tasks she wanted the students to do, and she said, now off you go and do the task, but please do it in silence. Now the expert teacher hadn't done that. This was a classroom that was full of dialogue and noise and children trying things out. It wasn't a riot, but it was full of talk. And this teacher said, now please go away and work in silence. And I asked the question afterwards, why did you ask them to work in silence? And this is what she was frightened of. She was frightened about they may not have been talking about the right things. Were they talking in the right way? And would they get it wrong? Actually, what happened in reality, of course, is the children did talk to each other because they were quite excited by the task, but they did it very quietly. And they talked about the mathematics. They didn't talk about the football, which is what this particular teacher was very concerned about. And they got things wrong. And it was great. They got things wrong, and they said, "Oh no, that won't quite work. Let's try something different." And remember what Ken Robinson said. If you're not prepared to be wrong, you'll never come up with anything original. So what we have to do to implement these new task-based, problem-based learning approaches, which involve dialogues, is to think about how we overcome resistance. And I'll come back to that at the end of my talk, mainly to say it's not easy. The second example I'm going to give you is something that I used to do, and it's to use the word imagine. This is Albert Einstein, who is probably one of the most imaginative and creative human beings that have ever existed. Everyone thinks about him as a great mathematician, and we always think about mathematics about being accurate. Well, actually, the kind of mathematics that he does isn't about being accurate, it's about being imaginative and creative. And he coined the phrase a thought experiment. And what he really meant was using your imagination. And here's one of his thought experiments. Imagine that you were chasing a light wave and you were traveling at the speed of light. So you are surfing a wave of light. What would you see? So this is him imagining. There's no mathematics. It's just him imagining what he would see. And he realised the answer he came up with couldn't possibly be right, i.e. he was wrong. And that led him to the theory of special relativity. But it started with this concept of let us imagine. And I think that idea of imagining is really important in the teaching of science and the teaching of mathematics as well. So, this is one of my favourite walks not far from my house. And all along this walk are trees. And a very common question or common issue that we teach in secondary school is how do trees grow? Or to put it a different way, where does wood come from? Where does the structure that makes up the tree trunks, where does that come from? And if you were to ask that of 11 to 16-year-olds, 11 to 19-year-olds, what they would do is basically fall back on their experience that they grew by eating food, therefore the trees must be growing by eating something. And what they think, by and large, is they eat the soil. You can show evidence that that can't possibly be true, but it's quite a difficult common sense understanding. So obviously what we have to do is we have to teach them how trees really grow, which is through the process of photosynthesis. So there's a fairly standard way for doing that. You get them to write these things down. So you do this on the whiteboard or the chalkboard, and you say, right, write this down in your books. What the trees are doing is they're taking in carbon dioxide and water, and they're producing glucose and oxygen in the presence of sunlight and chlorophyll. And as they get a bit older, and you can do it more precisely by writing down a chemical equation. Exactly the same as the word equation, but this time a chemical equation. And you'll say memorize, and you memorize it and you can reproduce it. Write me an equation for photosynthesis, no problem. So you now understand where wood comes from. Well, the answer is you don't, because there is study after study after study with university graduates asking them after they've completed their science degrees, where does wood come from? And very often they'll tell you it comes from trees eating the soil. So they haven't actually understood what the significance of those equations actually is. And that's because they haven't used their imagination. So this is what I would term an imaginative exercise in formative assessment. I want to know how well my children have understood what I have taught them. So I say, imagine you are a carbon dioxide molecule in the air. Write a story or poem about becoming part of a tree. So I want them to construct a narrative about how you become part of a tree. And obviously those equations are part of the narrative, but they're not the whole narrative. And it's much more fun, by the way, reading these and marking them than it is reading and marking a standard test. And you learn an awful lot about what your students have and have not understood. And they produce these narratives, and they're extremely creative. And we've done it in lots and lots of different ways as well. So using that word imagine, which lies at the heart of creativity and at the heart of problem solving, is actually fundamental to actually teaching subject content knowledge in a way that enables children to understand. So I hope what I've shown is there are ways of bringing creativity and problem solving into the curriculum without throwing the baby out with the bathwater. As long as teachers and school leaders are themselves prepared to be imaginative and creative. The problem is that we run into resistance. So we don't see thinking science being used in English secondary schools because teachers will say, oh, it's too much content to get through, I can't use this. Or they lack the confidence in their own pedagogic skills to ask the questions that need to be asked, or they lack the confidence that children will do what they're supposed to be doing, and they'll be talking about the football rather than talking about the science. In my experience, they may sometimes talk about the football, but then they talk about the science as well. To overcome that requires leadership for learning, which is another project which runs at the University of Cambridge, and that would require another keynote speech. So I hope on another occasion you'll invite me back and I can tell you about leadership for learning. So thank you very much. I hope the technology has worked. It's not my strong point, but I have really enjoyed putting this presentation together, and I hope you have a very good conference.
Thank you, Professor Jeffrey from Cambridge University, the United Kingdom, for sharing your deep thoughts on teaching and learning with us. Let's bring creativity and imagination in mind and prepare our students for the world of tomorrow. 谢谢杰夫·海沃德教授的精彩讲座，让我们静心思考，重新审视自己的教育学。现在让我们稍事休息，10分钟后精彩继续。Now let's have a short break. Please come back 10 minutes later. Everyone, welcome back. Let's come to the second part of this morning's forum, Practices on Redefining Learning in Middle Schools Around the World. 各位同仁，接下来让我们进入上午论坛的第2部分，经验分享。首先，让我们欢迎中国石家庄外国语学校副校长魏倩女士给我们带来报告，基于真实课堂的线上教学。Now let's welcome Ms. Wei Qian, Vice Principal of Shijiazhuang Foreign Language School from China, to give us a speech entitled Online Teaching Based on Real Classroom.
大家好，我今天发言的题目是基于真实课堂的线上教学。随着网络5G 覆盖，我们进入了一个全新的信息时代，学习渠道日趋多元。同时，随着疫情的全球蔓延，相对于学校传统的面对面班级教学，线上教学与学习成为新常态、新方式。如何进行线上教学？如何指导学生进行线上学习，对任何学校来说都需要认真研究和深入思考。下面我结合我校线上教学的做法，谈几点认识。线上教学不是新鲜事物，疫情之前的线上教学已经是很普遍的，比如远程教学、直播课堂、微课、慕课等。这些线上教学方式在疫情期间被许多地区和学校采用。它的优势，一是充分发挥名师资源辐射作用，二是不受时间限制，可以反复观看。而针对师生面对面线下教学来说，劣势一是师生不能交流互动，二是教师的主导性和学生的主体性不能得到充分发挥。我们10外集团的学生覆盖小学、初中、高中6到18岁的年龄段，学生总数近1万人。中小学生与大学生相比， 自律性相对较弱。在日常课堂上，教师最大限度激发学生的学习兴趣，学生的参与、体验、合作、探究的学习方式显得尤为重要。因此，我们在选择线上教学方式时，重点是考虑能否达到与在校园里师生面对面教学相近的效果，只有这样才能确保线上教学的质量。2016年，我校申报的国家“13+5”教育规划课题城乡教育均衡发展中山区教育扶贫实践模式研究顺利立项，其中一项子课题是山区小学教学点质量提升的有效模式研究。在中国，农村小学教学点是普遍存在的现象，小学教学点一般只有1-2个年级的10几名学生和1-2个教师，办学条件和教师素质相对较差。在教学点上学的孩子，家庭都是比较贫困的，家庭条件好的孩子都到乡镇中心小学或县城小学就读。通过教育解决扶贫问题，就需要让教学点的孩子能够享受到与乡镇中心小学和县城小学同样的优质教育。在课题研究中，我们与中国移动公司共同开发网上同步课堂教学平台，突出的特点是实现了农村中心小学和教学点的1:3同层次、标准化、双互动、无延时的网上视频实时互动课堂模式。请大家来看一段视频。
好，同学们坐姿。端正。好，在我们1年级的时候，我们学过了钟表。我们在1年级的时候学了整时。老师现在想来考考大家，看看大家还记不记得？当我们的分针指向12的时候，时针指向3就是30。好，老师再考大家，当分针指向12的时候，时针指向5就是50。老狼，几点了？我们来，哪只小狼来回答一下几点了？这是。老师，请西林底的第2排的中间那位小男生来回答。8点半。好，正确啊。
这种1:3线上教学方式只需要4个客户端就可以实现双互动、无延时，1:3延时仅在几十毫秒之内。因此，我们把这个技术应用在疫情期间的线上教学，解决了从小学到高中200多个教学班、11000名学生和近1000名教师同时网上教学，达到了与在校园里师生面对面实时互动的课堂教学效果，形成了网上视频实时互动课堂的实外方案，并在中国教育报进行了报道。为确保效果，我们在实施网上视频实时互动课堂的过程中提出7个确保：确保网络设备正常使用，确保网上集体备课，确保教师网上教学全覆盖，确保学生上课全覆盖，确保课堂互动，确保作业分层适量，确保学生作业按时完成，老师及时批阅反馈。线上教学虽然解决了技术问题，但毕竟隔着屏幕，如何做到课堂上师生情感互动，对教学质量的保障是十分重要的。因此，我们采用以班级为单位，自己的老师教自己的学生的教学方式，最大限度地还原真实的线下课堂教学。这种基于真实课堂的线上教学方式，由班主任在网上建立云端教室，这个班级的学生和科任教师都登录到同一间云端教室，按照课表规定时间进行课堂教学，真正实现了自己的老师与自己的学生每天面对面实时互动教学，师生交流流畅，具有很强的亲和性、互动性和针对性。总结来看，我们的线上视频实时互动课堂有如下优势：一、视频实时互动课堂让空间缩小，学生心情放松，便于老师第一时间掌握学生情况，及时关心学生， 让师生感情沟通不受阻，同时稳定家长情绪，更利于维持正常良好的家庭秩序和亲子关系。疫情防控期间，家长要正常工作，不能长时间陪伴在孩子身边。学生长期宅在家里，都容易产生紧张、焦虑、无聊等负面情绪，很容易造成亲子关系紧张。视频网络互动课堂上，老师与学生、学生与学生之间互动时操作很简单。第一次上课进行培训后，学生都能掌握，包括小学1年级的学生。上课前，学生自己打开电脑或投屏到电视机，登录到班级云端教室。上课预备铃声响起时，学生就已经在书桌前做好准备上课，较好地解决了父母不在家担心孩子学习的问题。我们的学生每天能够在云端课堂与自己熟悉的老师、同学见面，老师能够很好地组织、调动、激励每一个学生，能够很好地实时关注、提醒学生的学习状态，能够把老师的课件共享到屏幕上，做到老师边讲边在屏幕上书写，边讲边提问学生进行互动，能够做到关心每一个学生，面向全体学生。在这样的视频实时互动课堂中，老师们更亲切了，学生们更积极了，家长更安心了。和谐的课堂氛围和亲子关系最大限度地保证了学生居家学习的效果。2. 视频实时互动课堂能保证老师随时了解学生学情，避免加生犯，保证课堂效果老师为主导，保证学生主体，不让一个学生掉队，让每一个孩子享受优质教育。我们要求老师们在视频实时互动课堂上，在教学准备上加强网上教研，研究机趣策略、互动策略、调控策略、指导策略，设计好问题驱动或任务驱动，通过师生之间或生生之间的思维接力、回答问题的接力，吸引学生注意力，提高学生专注力。同时还研究学科活动，丰富学生学习体验。在教学状态上，老师要着正装、化淡妆上课，展示良好的精神状态。要授课环境光线充足，背景整洁，使视频画面清晰。同时要语言亲切有激情，感染调动学生的学习热情。在教学内容上，要放慢进度，狠抓基础，多提问，重点评，多表扬，多激励。在教学方式上，避免较长时间的老师讲学生听，学生容易溜号，关注薄弱学生，一问多答，营造了讨论的氛围。避免一个学生发言时间较长，或老师和一个学生长时间互动。借助聊天室的对答，使每一名学生能问问题，能解答问题，能参与到课堂中。避免抛出学生大项目或大问题，避免学生一节课不动笔、不笔记，老师不反馈、不检查、不了解，真正关注到每一个学生的上课状态。要求学生在视频实时互动课堂上，在学习状态上，居家学习要尽量达到在校学习的状态，学生一律穿校服上课，按上下课铃声就位，增强上课的仪式感。在课堂表现上，要专心听讲，积极回答问题，参与课堂讨论。在学业评价上，教师要及时批改学生网上提交的作业，通过线上的教学测试平台，加强单元测试和阶段考试，及时分析学生线上学习的效果。3. 视频网络互动课堂不仅是在文化课的学习上，我们还开展了丰富的线上教育活动，提出了避免学生用眼过度的具体举措，以保障学生全面健康的成长。视频实时互动课堂当堂学好了学科知识，课后学生不用因学习问题再使用任何电子产品， 学生通过阅读、做家务、体育锻炼、做手工、听音乐、绘画等方式充实家庭生活，放松学生的心情，最大限度减轻学生身心压力，保护学生的视力。同时，在疫情期间，开设了丰富的线上教育活动，如线上的升旗、主题班团队课、演讲比赛、绘画比赛等，开展了文明、健康、创新等主题教育活动，对学生进行爱国、生命、责任等教育，开展了亲子阅读、亲子运动、亲子劳动、亲子游戏等亲子活动，家校共育，实现学生的身心健康成长和全面发展。下面我们来欣赏一段视频。
宅在家上网课学不误有进步，宅在家爱劳动帮父母做家务，宅在家勤锻炼项目多成习惯。疫情到来我们都在家里宅，小朋友们你千万不要懈怠，家务锻炼样样都要做起来，在家上学也精彩，体育锻炼运动彩蛋学起来，要我征服比比谁更厉害，帮助爸妈摘菜打扫洗碗筷，家务劳动快做起来。我就是是我要是我要随便理财，爱劳动爱运动健康回来，不要懒惰不要等待，动起来最棒的小孩。我就是是我就是随便理财，爱劳动爱运动健康回来，不要懒惰不要等待，动起来最棒的小孩。我就是是微笑最棒的财，爱劳动爱运动健康会到来，不要懒惰不要等待，一起做是微笑最棒的财。我就是是微笑最棒的财，爱劳动爱运动健康回来，不要懒惰不要等待，动起来最棒的小孩。我就是是微笑最棒的财，爱劳动爱运动健康会到来，不要懒惰不要等待，一起做是微笑最棒的财。
总之，室外基于真实课堂的线上视频实时互动课堂，较好地解决了老师和家长对网上教学的种种担心，取得了很好的效果。顾先生说，教育过程就是师生的对话，这就是我们进行的基于真实课堂的线上教学要坚持并始终躬行的。当我们的线上教学形式和方式趋于成熟化、常态化后，我们又把这一线上教学学习方式推广到山区精准帮扶中。由于山区美术教师紧缺，室外小学面向山区6所小学开设美术专递课程，借助网上同步课堂教学平台，由我们小学的美术教师通过网络面向山区的小学生直接授课，让学生对美术这门学科有了初步的认知，感受到美术知识的海洋是无边无界、自由畅想的。经过1学期的美术专递课堂，山区孩子们的观察力和想象力较初期有了很大的进步，他们的想法很多都能体现在自己的画面上。从孩子们的作品和课后反馈可以看出，学生逻辑思维能力和语言表达能力比第1节课都有了很大的提高。美术课真正成为山区孩子们通往美好未来的桥梁。2017年，我国公布新的高中课程方案和课程标准，更换新的学科教材。2018年，在全国分批次推进新课程新教材实施。2020年，石家庄外国语学校被教育部确定为新课程新教材实施的国家级示范校。为充分发挥示范校的示范引领作用， 为更好地帮扶带动农村学校，石外与行堂、灵寿、平山、锦行、藏黄、元氏6个山区县县域高中开展对口帮扶。这6所山区县域高中路途远，分布广，按照原有的帮扶模式，深入山区学校进行现场的交流和指导极其不方便。因此，我们通过网络建立了石外教师与山区教师常态化的联合教研机制，通过网络直播课将石外教师的常态课完整呈现给山区6所高中的教师学习观摩，通过石外教师和在石外帮扶指导下的山区教师的各种网络公开课，帮助山区教师用好新教材，提高课堂教学能力，提升个人专业水平。这些公开课通过国家教研网面向全国公开播放，线上观看的教师遍布全国各地，已经累计达到21万人，产生了良好的辐射带动效果。各位教育同仁，我们已经迎来了线上教学和线下教学共存的时代。无论今后疫情是否存在，线上教学对学校教育来说仍然是需要长期关注和研究的课题。我们要努力构建线上线下混合式学习的新生态。正如顾先生所言，今年年会的主题是重新定义学习。这个主题非常切合时代的要求，如何进行教育，如何指导学生学习，是摆在我们每一所学校、每一位教师面前的最主要的任务。我的发言到此结束，谢谢各位的聆听，不当之处敬请批评指正。
谢谢魏校长的分享，相信石外的线上教学经验一定会给大家今后的教学提供具体的思路与方法。Thank you, Ms. Wei. The online teaching and learning experiences of Shijiazhuang Foreign Language School will surely provide us with practical ways in our future school life. Now let's welcome 3 speakers from Waterloo Catholic District School Board, Canada. They are Mr. Dan Waite, Chief Operating Officer, Ms. Amy Haley, Program Head of Language and Communication, and Mr. Matt Anderton, Program Head of Mathematics. They will share with us a speech, Building Thinking Classroom. 接下来，让我们有请来自加拿大滑铁卢天卓公立教育局丹威特先生、语言与交流项目主管艾米希利女士、数学项目主管马特安德顿先生为我们带来报告：构建思维课堂。
Hello, my name is Dan Witt, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer of the Research and Development Office and International Education Services of the Waterloo Catholic District School Board. Prior to my current role, I was a principal in our schools for 15 years, including my final 8 years at St. Benedict Catholic Secondary School. During my time at St. Benedict, I had the good fortune to work with 2 outstanding educators who will be presenting with me today, in Matt Anderton and Amy Healy. Matt has been an educator for 15 years and currently serves as a student achievement and innovation consultant with our school board. Matt was recognized in 2019 with the Ontario Mathematics Teacher Award for exceptional and creative teaching. During his time at St. Benedict, Matt served as program head of mathematics. Amy has also been an educator for 15 years and serves currently as program head of language and communications, as well as school literacy lead at Resurrection Catholic Secondary School. During her time at St. Benedict, Amy served as program head of school improvement and school literacy lead. It is our honor and privilege to present to you today our experiences of implementing the Thinking Classroom Framework, a pedagogical framework for classroom instruction that significantly improves student learning and achievement at St. Benedict.
Hello, everyone. We are thrilled to be with you today, redefining learning through building thinking classrooms. We're first going to begin with Dan unpacking the data and showing how this new pedagogical approach greatly improved student achievement. Matt and I will then move with talking about our journey through numeracy and literacy and how we saw the improvement of student achievement as well in our classrooms. Section 3, we'll talk about the basics. What really is a thinking classroom? We will then move forward with unpacking the thinking classroom through the fundamentals, looking at rich tasks, visibly random groups, vertical non-permanent surfaces, flow, and how we found the global competencies naturally emerging in our students. We'll finally consolidate with some final thoughts to end our program.
In the next couple of slides, we are going to look at data supporting the implementation of the Thinking Classroom framework. As an educator and administrator for more than 30 years, I've been exposed to many different pedagogical strategies aimed at improving student learning. And I have to be honest, in those 30 years, I have never seen a strategy that has come close to the impact of the Thinking Classroom framework. And I think the data that I'm going to show you in the next 2 slides are really going to illustrate that point. So this slide right here, it really shows you kind of the trend of the results on the EQAO assessment of mathematics for the past 5 years. The first couple years kind of show a downward trend, which was consistent with predictive data by our researchers suggesting that the overall strength of our students was decreasing in the area of mathematics. And to really change that downward trend, we needed an intervention. In 2016-2017, so the third year of that chart, we implemented the first year of the Thinking Classroom framework, and we saw a nominal increase. In the fourth bar, we see the second year of implementation, where again, there is a slight increase from the previous year. All of this is in contradiction with, again, the predictive data suggesting our students should be getting worse and worse. The third year of implementation, we see a true breakout year in terms of that pattern, where the predictive data suggested it should have been one of our poorest years in terms of student performance. And in fact, that was the highest year ever for our school and the highest result within our school board. So it really supported the true impact of the Thinking Classroom framework. For our, this next slide looks at our literacy results. And with the literacy strategy, you can see there was a consistent downward trend over 4 years. And that trend, again, was consistent with the research data suggesting that our students were getting weaker and weaker. So again, we really needed an intervention strategy to change that pattern. So within 1 year, we developed an alternative strategy based on the Thinking Classroom framework in an English classroom in a literacy setting. And you can see that the end result really achieved the highest result we had in 5 years. And again, that totally contradicted the predictive data, suggesting that it would be one of our least successful years.
As a math teacher in the St. Benedict's math department, we are really focused on improving student achievement and engagement in our classes. And we try to do that by implementing a lot of different strategies in our class, and also changing things like the order of a lesson, restructuring our unit plan, teaching to provincial assessments. But no matter what we did, they didn't have much of an impact on student achievement. We found that our scores on those EQAO assessments were stagnant, and our students year to year really weren't getting any better at math, and their engagement wasn't changing at all either. And what was really happening is that we were teaching the same way all the time. And it wasn't until we started to connect what we were doing in the math classes with the available research that we really noticed a big change and a big improvement in our classes. And it's because we are beginning to teach differently.
In literacy, we knew that we were on a downward trend for our predictive data for the OSSLT. And we were watching the great work that was happening in the math department. So our team asked ourselves, where can we look to start making these big changes? And we first began our journey looking at the research of John Hattie, an award-winning educational researcher and writer from Australia. He believed that best practices in student learning and achievement was made through visible learning. Visible learning and teaching occurs when teachers see learning through the eyes of the students and help them become their own teachers. As we dug a little deeper, the research was very clear. By providing opportunities for students to make their learning visible, it enhances the student learning experience, which will improve, ultimately, student achievement. Educators are able to support students in real time, not when it was too late. So this was the first step in our journey in trying to change what our predictive data was showing. So we had to look at not necessarily what we were teaching, so where our courses were very content driven, but more so how we were teaching. So using Hattie's research, we asked ourselves, how do we make our teaching more visible to our students? How do we make student learning more visible to our teachers? And finally, how can we collectively work together to transform that instructional practice to ultimately improve student learning and achievement?
In the math department too, we were thinking that we didn't want our students to just leave us after 4 years of high school with just understanding of the curriculum. We know in today's world, students need to have a special set of skills that are able to equip them to solve any type of problem. So we began to brainstorm about the different skills that our students need to have, and really thinking about how can we go beyond the curriculum to help our students face any challenge that they'll have. And then we came across Michael Fullen's work and his new pedagogies for deep learning, because his goal is for us to design learning experiences for our students that will help them develop a special set of skills called the global competencies that will help them solve any type of problem that they'll be faced with in the future.
So Michael Fullen believed that schools must inquire deeper into their own practices, explore new ways to motivate their learners, make use of learning styles, introduce multiple intelligences, integrate learning, and teach thinking, and in the process, discover the passion and moral purpose that makes teaching exciting and effective. So essentially what we're sharing with you is how we kind of collectively came together to dig deep into the research, to transform the program for our students, and really work together as educators to drive change.
And finally, we looked at Peter Liljedahl's work on building thinking classrooms. Now, Peter's story is important. As a math researcher, he spent a lot of time in math classes. And what he noticed was the same in all of them, that there was a teacher who would assign a problem to the class, that many hands would go up after a short time of students trying to think about the problem, and the teacher running around frustrated, trying to help students in the class. And his story is one of a situation where he tries to get away from students as mimickers, where students are in a class where the teacher does an example and then the students have to replicate that thinking. And then on to the next example on the board, the teacher's at the front of the room and students are sitting at their desks, again, trying to mimic, trying to duplicate the thinking of the teacher. And what he wanted to do was develop a thinking classroom where all students in the class could think, they're solving rich problems, and the key thing is that they're able to solve any type of problem, not just the problem that the teacher presents to them in the class. So rather now the students aren't just consumed with trying to figure out what's going to be on the test, they're able to solve and think for themselves, and the teacher can facilitate the learning that occurs in the class. And that really brings us to John Hattie, Peter Liljedahl, and Michael Fullen, where in Hattie's work, and his research leads him to think about the pedagogical moves that are most valuable to use with your students. Because there's such a small amount of time that we have our students, we want to do what's valuable in our classes. And Michael Fullen is thinking about designing tasks that get at deeper learning opportunities for our students. and having them develop a special set of skills, the global competencies that go beyond the curriculum to help prepare them for life after school. And Peter Liljedahl's work on building thinking classrooms, really those are the pedagogical moves that tie everything together that help students think and learn, creating a classroom that's focused on learning, student achievement, and engagement.
So we've shared the data that this pedagogical approach works and the research to support the process. So now what we're going to do in our program is dive into the basics, introducing to you all building a thinking classroom. So what is a thinking classroom? Thinking classrooms are simply learning spaces that make thinking and learning visible, naturally infusing critical thinking, creativity, collaboration, and communication into daily practice.
Let's show you a thinking classroom. We're going to show you a 30-second video that we're going to play through twice. This video was taken in a math class. It's a 75-minute period. And in the video, what you're going to do is you're going to see the beginning, you're going to see the action part of the lesson, and then you'll see the consolidation. While you're watching the video, I want you to think about two things. List as many things that you're noticing about this class, and then as many things as you can think of that you're wondering. And we'll talk about some of the things that we're noticing and wondering about after you see the video twice through. Okay, that was the first time. Here's the second time through again in its entirety.
So, after watching that time-lapse video twice, did you notice what was the classroom setup? Did you notice that the desks weren't simply in straight rows, but actually grouped in pods of 3 around the classroom? Did you notice the interaction between the students? Did you notice the fact that they were collaborating and working together? What about what they were working on? Did you notice students standing up and not sitting down during the lesson? What were they writing on? Were they writing in notebooks or were they writing up on the boards? And where was the teacher in all of this? Did you notice that it wasn't necessarily at the front of the classroom, but the teacher was actually naturally infused working with the students?
So that does not look like our traditional math class. The math classes that I was part of as a student were in rows with a teacher at the front with students' hands raised. But this classroom is much more active, and that's done intentionally. And we'll go through some of those pedagogical moves that make up a thinking classroom in the next section.
So now we're going to start to unpack the fundamentals. So really look deep into how we began building thinking classrooms in our schools.
And what we did here is we took Peter Liljedahl's framework of thinking classrooms, and we're looking at the 4 phases. It's important to note that while we're going through the phases, we're learning new skills as teachers. And the way we're doing it is through ongoing research, practicing those skills, intentionally reflecting on how our lessons went, collaborating with others, inviting people into our classrooms to get feedback. That ongoing collaboration is really what sticks for us and our learning of this framework. Let's look at just the first phase to begin with, because this is what happens in year one. These elements of the thinking classroom are really what makes that classroom a thinking classroom. Because in order to have students think on their own, become less reliant on the teacher, and having students become more willing to solve complex problems and work together and develop those global competencies, it's necessary that we start lessons with a good problem, that we form groups in our classrooms that are visibly random, and we'll talk more about that, and that we're using non-permanent vertical surfaces. And all these elements are done intentionally to create that classroom environment that we need that is conducive to more thinking.
In phase one, we're all about setting the stage for building a thinking classroom. And the very first thing as a teacher is to look at how we can visibly randomize groups. Visibly randomized groups give students the opportunity to work with different students every single day. When we look at visibly random groups, ideally, according to Peter Liljedahl, we are looking at groups of 3. If we noticed on that last video that the desks no longer are arranged in those straight lines, but they're actually grouped in those groups of 3. We want to make sure that our room is defronted. And what that means is that we don't actually have a center stage of a source of instruction. In the visibly random groups of 3, students are sitting and standing, working together with that lesson for that day. Now, some of the strategies that we have found in our own classrooms is using something as simple as a deck of cards. As students enter into the classroom, you give them a corresponding card, and they can look at what is on that card, and that is the group of 3 that they would work with that day. Other options are great options that we can find online, apps that could take your classroom group and do a randomized grouping that would be right up on the Bright link as the students arrived in the classroom, and that's who they would work with that day. What we noticed right off the bat with visibly random groups is that students are actually given the opportunity, by working with different people every day, build that sense of community even stronger than before. They get to talk, and they get to learn, and they get to grow together as a community, which we have found has been an effective way of even improving student achievement.
After students are in their visibly random groups, the next thing to do is to assign the students a rich task. A rich task is a good problem, a problem that's so open, all students in your class have an entry point into it. Because what we're looking to be able to do is engage all learners. We don't want somebody who's struggling with math not to feel welcomed into our class, and not to feel like they have a chance to engage with the math. So we're starting with this problem that we'll call that has a low floor, meaning everyone can participate in some way. And then as the lesson progresses, we might be adding to that problem, giving hints to groups that need hints, extensions to groups that need that problem extended. So it has a high ceiling, meaning that we can take it anywhere that we need it to go. It's carefully designed using the curriculum and keeping that in mind. And again, it's focused exactly on where students are at and helping them move through that lesson, feeling like they can engage the entire time. And this really does justice to what I'm trying to talk about. Because when a problem is too hard and the students don't have the skill to answer that problem or engage with that problem yet, students have a great deal of anxiety, and a lot of them turn off and they're not able to engage with the math, and they feel like they have no hope in the class. So they become disengaged in class. They may become a problem in class, and all of a sudden you have learners who are not involved in the learning goal and the learning of the day. Also, the same thing happens when the problems are too easy, because students' skills are beyond the type of question that you're asking. So again, they become bored and they're becoming disengaged in a different way. So what we want to be able to do is manage the balance between the skill level, the challenge, and the skill level and the challenge of the problem. So for developing a good problem, a rich task, we're able to keep students in that state of flow where they're engaged the entire time. And while we're using intentional teacher moves in order to get students to where we need them to be at by the end of the day to reach that learning goal.
The next step is looking into our final step of phase one, and it really ties everything together. Earlier in the presentation, we spoke about John Hattie's notion of visible learning and the fact that students and teachers need to make that learning visible. What we see in building a thinking classroom is through the use of vertical non-permanent surfaces, students and teacher are able to make that learning visible, right up on the wall for everyone to see. Students have the option of changing their response as often and as necessary as they can. And this is simply because it's a non-permanent surface. So as students work together, working through rich tasks, solving problems, collaborating, they are able to do so with the confidence that making a mistake is okay because they can simply wipe it away and start over. So what are vertical non-permanent surfaces? Well, we can see them in the use of whiteboards, or here we use a product called whitebooks that are posted around the room. You could use windows, you could use tile flooring, you could even use page projectors. Anything that enables the student to be able to write and simply wipe away. What we know is that a thinking classroom is a doing classroom, and you can be creative here, and students have the ability to be creative with these surfaces. Vertical means that they're standing up, and the research shows that students are actually more productive with more focused energy and stronger cognitive skills standing while learning. As I had stated before, it does connect nicely to Hattie's concept of visible learning. The work is going up on the board. And what's really nice as an educator is we are able to see in real time if a student is doing really well with the rich task or if they're struggling with that rich task. And we can help them in the moment, in real time, not perhaps when it's too late. We're teaching our students through using vertical non-permanent surfaces to take risks, to jump into problems and solve them and use those critical thinking skills. And we're also showing students that with a growth mindset, they don't need to have a perfect response. The non-permanent surfaces allows the students to work together, changing things as they please. We refer to this almost of the mobility of knowledge. We're seeing this transfer show right up on the board. But ultimately, what it really comes down to with vertical non-permanent surfaces is that we are seeing our students' learning made visible right in front of us. So here's something to think about. We want our students to leave us with the necessary skills in their toolbox to be globalized thinkers and learners. We want them to be creative and critical thinkers. We want them to be able to collaborate with those around them to problem solve in a variety of contexts. What we noticed was that beyond the curriculum, the thinking classroom was promoting these skills naturally. Before thinking classroom, students weren't active agents in their thinking. We noticed a lack of confidence in their ideas. We noticed a lack of willingness to collaborate with others and a fear of embarrassment and hesitation in reaching out for help. We also noticed an inability to problem solve in a variety of ways. Next, Matt is going to share with you what we began to see in our students when we actually identified the global competencies.
Here are the 6 skills that Michael Fullen identified as necessary for students to face challenges of the 21st century. Now, when I think back to the way I learned math and the way I used to teach math, I wasn't developing these skills in my students because as the teacher, I was the gatekeeper of all the knowledge in the room. So when I assigned a question that I did on the board, I was sharing my thinking, and the students were waiting for me to share my thinking. They're mimicking the type of thinking that I was coming up with. But really, we know math and languages are creative subjects with multiple entry points. So if we teach that way, students are going to be able to show us a different set of skills. And when we use good problems, when we have students working with different people every day, when people are up out of their seats and they're actively engaged in the learning, no longer is the teacher the gatekeeper of all that knowledge in the room, but they're actively building these skills in our students. So the question I have now is, are we expecting that our students are going to have these 6 skills, or are we going to change the way we teach to actively develop these skills in our students?
So, to consolidate, what we have here is a thinking classroom in action. So what we can do here is highlight the elements that we've just outlined for you in this program. What we see here are randomized groupings of 3. We see it in our students standing, as well as the way the groups of 3 of the desks are clustered in the classroom. We see that the classroom is defronted, meaning that there's no center source of instruction. Rather, we see the teacher with the students infused right into the learning process. We see the use of non-permanent vertical surfaces, the students standing up at boards where they can write and erase as they go through the learning program. We also see students engaged in a rich task where a natural flow is seamlessly working through the lesson. Now, take a moment and watch this next video. This video was taken actually when I was in China a few years ago working with a group of students. What do you notice here? What do you wonder? And how is this different from the classroom that you see daily?
This is why it all matters. We have a lot of qualitative data that students are telling us that the class feels different, that math class is different. It's different from all the types of math learning that they've done before they came to us at St. Benedict's. And teachers feel energized by teaching this way, by empowering their students. And it feels great to see our students do well. But when we go and look at it, we've seen from Dan that our provincial scores are up in both math and literacy. And here is looking at 4-year achievement data at St. Benedict's. You can see when we implemented the thinking classroom in 2016, 2017, we had a higher percentage of learners in the 50 to 70 range. But you can see here over time, looking at all the math classes, we're able to move all of our learners up a level. No longer do we have the same high percentage of learners stuck in the 50s, but now they've moved up into the 60s and 70s. And same with those students who were in the middle of our class in the 70 range. They're still meeting provincial standard, but now they're above that. And they're working themselves into the 80 and 90 range in the class. So we know that we're making a difference in the student outcomes in our math classes at St. Benedict's, and it's because we are no longer teaching the same way. We redefined what learning was in our class, and it's because we connected ourselves and our pedagogy to the research.
I would like to express my sincere thanks to the GERA K-12 conference team for the opportunity to be both a participant and present our learning at this conference with such an inspiring theme of redefining learning. If you're interested in learning more about the Thinking Classroom framework, please don't hesitate to reach out to me by email, and we would be happy to collaborate with you. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
What great achievements the Thinking Classroom has brought to the students. Thank you so much. 构建思维课堂显著提高了学生的学习能力和学业成绩。谢谢你们的分享。接下来我们有请丹麦育英高中的校长伊莎贝斯·加贝尔·奥斯汀女士给我们带来报告疫情时期的学习。Now let's welcome Ms. Elsbeth Gabriel Austin, Principal of Joring Sixth Form College, Denmark. Her speech is Did the pandemic help redefine learning or define learning?
Welcome to my presentation. Welcome to all you GERA participants. I am Elisabeth Austin from Denmark. I have chosen the subjects of learning offline or online. Redefine learning offline or online. What I have put together, in fact, is my reflection on the effects the corona pandemic has had on our concept of learning. I'll now share screen so that you can see my presentation, and that'll just take the usual minute or so. This is my presentation, and I hope you can see it. I'll now make it a big screen, so in fact, you have the best chance of seeing it. I've chosen to call my presentation A Lesson Taught by the Pandemic. And as I said, I'm Elisabeth Gabel Austin, Principal of Hjørring Sixth Form College, Denmark. I put a menu together for you. First of all, I'll just give you my short CV, then I'll say a little about Hjørring Sixth Form College, and then I'll continue to the subject about learning. What is learning? What is learning offline and online? And in fact, did the pandemic help us redefine, or perhaps rather define, learning? And what were the effects, loss or gain? What lesson did we learn from the pandemic? And then I will reach a conclusion. And as I said, I'm Elisabeth Gabel Austin. Some of you might remember me, and I certainly remember a lot of you. But just for those of you that don't remember me, I would just like to tell you that I studied English and took my master's at Copenhagen University. I worked as an English teacher at the upper secondary schools. Then I became a national advisor for English, working for the Danish Ministry of Education. I'm now principal of Hjørring Sixth Form College, and I've been that since 2004. I'm also a member of the examination board in English for the Danish universities, and I'm a member of various advisory boards at 3 universities and colleges altogether in Denmark. I am a member of the governing board of University College of Northern Denmark, which is an institution where you have professional trainings, sort of medium-long trainings programs. I'm also a member of the representative committee of Copenhagen University. That was a little about me. And now about the school. I put a map here for you so that you can see where Denmark is. It is a tiny little dot in the black circle in Europe, which is in the blue colored in area of the map, the world map. I've then enlarged Denmark, as you see in a larger black circle, and there you will see Hjørring at the very top of Denmark. We are actually the most northern sixth form college in Denmark. Denmark has 5.5 million inhabitants, and Hjørring is in the north of Denmark. We have in Hjørring 26,000 inhabitants, and Hjørring Sixth Form College admits students at the ages of 15 or 16. We have around 800 students. The school offers 2 upper secondary programs, and we have 100 staff, of which 75 are teachers. We are an independent school, but funded by the Danish state, and our annual budget is around $10 million. Now you know a little about me and my school, and then I would like to tell you a little about my thinking. First of all, let's look at what is learning. I'm sure we have set various definitions, but I like this definition. Learning is an integral component of being human. Human beings do 2 things very well. They survive and learn. Our capacity for learning has offered the human race a degree of flexibility and adaptability far surpassing any other species on the planet. This definition is not mine, but it's Ormrod's from 2008. But before continuing, let me also confess to actually being a humanist, and my humanist approach to learning is so eloquently expressed in the following quote. A central tenet in humanism is the value of human worth and dignity. In an educational context, this is translated into the practice of shaping the whole child with a view to improving his or her character. Academic performance, motivation, and behavior are linked specifically to the learning environment, whereby supportive classroom cultures promote enhanced self-esteem, intrinsic motivation, and overall well-being and success. This is Snowman from 2009. So the following, and perhaps I should just return to the humanist approach, because the following is my reflection on how my humanist approach to the learning process was tested by the global pandemic caused by COVID-19. It affected us all and is still affecting us now in its aftermath. In the spring of 2020, our schools overnight went from traditional classroom teaching to teaching in the online classroom. In retrospect, we have to admit that if we had planned to change the school to exclusively online teaching, it would have required months of in-service training of teachers to prepare for such a major change. Now everybody had to learn by doing online, and students and teachers alike had a rising learning curve that we can still benefit from. Apart from exploring new teaching methods and devising our individual solutions as we went along teaching on Zoom or Teams or whatever facility was available, we also learned the shortcomings of teaching online. In Denmark, we are highly digitalized to start with. Everybody has at least one computer and a smartphone, and a great deal of research has already been carried out to map the effects on learning when pupils and students are constantly distracted by their device or PC. So for that reason, we decided to go offline. So our school had a so-called offline week in the autumn of 2018, where everybody, teachers and students alike, for a whole week couldn't use the internet, their phone or computer, and thus were forced to think in new ways, or rather revisit the old ways of teaching. We had, though, bought several board games, card games, air hockey and football games to stimulate activities in the breaks, and during that week it was a noisier school. Students actually chatted and laughed during breaks because they had no phone to hide behind and couldn't check the various SOMEs to follow their distant friends. Now the friends next to them became important. Teachers used paper dictionaries, old ways of calculating maths, games to illustrate how to solve problems, etc. Students were engaged in more social activities and actually afterwards admitted to having had more social interaction and fun than they had imagined beforehand. Actually, some students had been terribly worried about the offline week and had feared being cut off from the world and suffering irreparable damage to friendship connections. That, of course, didn't happen. But the learning curve had been sharp, and the ensuing evaluation showed that students had discovered that they could survive without the extension to their arm, the smartphone. Several admitted to having got much more out of the teaching because they had not been distracted and stressed by having to keep up with the pressure to react to posts on Facebook, Instagram, and other chat rooms, or texts on their phones. In the middle of digesting all the positive results and having bought phone frames for each classroom so that students could deposit their phones during class, the pandemic turned everything upside down. In March 2020, the virtual classroom became everyday life, and it happened from one day to the next. Students now appeared as small heads or small impersonal circles on the computer screen, but the virtual classroom soon presented its own challenges. Even though you were online and apparently connected to everybody, the individual student faced new choices and unforeseen challenges. Ambitious students tended to become more ambitious and used between 7 and 9 hours or more every day on schoolwork, simply because the time was available. Challenged students couldn't cope without the formally structured school day and the stimulus in the physical learning space from classmates' company. But the quiet students gained space and joined in. Some could concentrate better without the disturbance in the classroom. Some students couldn't resist the temptation of doing other things, not having all that, or now rather having all that time at their own disposal without an authority checking on them. For everybody, the 7 to up to 9 or 10 hours spent in front of the screen and only separated by short breaks, mostly used to change the scene from one subject to the next, all this generated extreme tiredness and killed motivation. In most subjects, teachers tended also to focus on written assignments, and consequently the oral competency was neglected. Now that we are talking about the teachers, let's look at how they managed. They had to work very hard to establish the classroom as a virtual space where teaching required respect for fellow students and for the teacher, where you had to take an active part with the camera activated and despite a very tender or insecure private internet connection. On top of that, teachers had to combine all this with perhaps a spouse working from home and their own children being homeschooled. That was a very hard thing to do, and teachers managed fantastically well. What happened to learning? Do we now have to redefine learning, or is the definition we have already good enough? We redefined learning to be online, and we learned something. But more importantly, we had to realize that we had perhaps forgotten learning as a value dependent on human physical interaction and contact. The warmth in the little chat, in the breaks between classes were missing. The encouragement from the teacher to the student in a smile, the closeness of classmates, and the shared effort and curiosity strengthened and transmitted entirely by physical contact and by the informal social interaction which is impossible to create in a virtual space. All that was missing, no matter what people would like to think. We have analyzed and evaluated, and whether you are asking students in the upper secondary schools or students at colleges and universities, the answers are loud and clear from all. We missed the teachers and the classmates. We missed not being able to communicate directly with the teacher and getting that little help that moved an obstacle. Teaching online cannot replace teaching in the classroom, ever. Danish research shows that students were very worried about their own performance and self-efficacy and their exam results during lockdowns. There was a loss of motivation, there was loneliness, isolation, depression, and extreme boredom. All these were just some of the worrying side effects from the online schooling for so long. Actually, this can be said for both students and teachers. We must now face the loss of learning in many subjects, the loss of social competencies. That is a price paid by a generation for whom 1.5 academic years have been spent online. And the teachers? The same answer is loud and clear. We missed the students, the life and interaction in the classroom, and also being with colleagues and being inspired by colleagues. This doesn't mean to say that learning cannot happen outside the classroom, but the classroom is crucial in the learning process. But was it all bad? No, not at all. We learned something. We learned flexibility. We learned that individual guidance can be beneficial online. For instance, guiding the process involved in written coursework between teacher and the individual student. We learned that to some extent, meetings involving staff internally and also meetings with external partners can take place online, and it can actually save time and transport expenses. So flexibility in planning is something we have learned, and that can be applied, but only as a supplement to the school day in the physical classroom. One thing that our students carry with them as a result of the pandemic is handling a crisis. They have learnt at close quarters how to cope and survive when order, that is, what was familiar and taken for granted, suddenly became chaos, and a new order had to be established. Then, after that new order had become routine, the old order had to be reawakened, and the whole of that process gave everybody resilience they wouldn't otherwise have gained. As educators with tight budgets, we may see online schooling as a way of saving money, but the long-term effect is so costly for our society that saving the money is simply not worth it. The other price is much, much higher. But let's just look at the social learning theory for a couple of seconds. Social learning theory is a theory of learning which posits that learning is a cognitive process that occurs in a social context. This is suggested by Bandura, who has said, schools are places where human interaction is central to teaching and learning. And that is what I like to hang on to. My conclusion is that we do actually not need to redefine learning, but we must preserve the core definition of learning as taking place face to face with a teacher and other students. And that definition is not an obstacle to innovative teaching methods, far from it. We may introduce robotics to assist learning in various ways, and that's fine. But human contact in real space is a key to real innovation and progress. In close proximity to others, we are stimulated to think thoughts we would not otherwise have had. Research has long since shown that as an undeniable fact. So, these were my thoughts for you. Thank you for watching. I look forward very much to seeing you next year at the conference in Zhejiang. I hope that you are all well. I hope you have enjoyed my thoughts. I look forward to seeing all the other contributions on this virtual conference. This virtual conference is only a pale reflection of what it was like, and hopefully will be like again, to be together at our foreign language school in Zhejiang. I would also like now to thank everybody at the school for having staged this virtual platform so that at least we can keep in touch until we'll be able to see each other again. And I really hope that that will be next October. But for now, have a continued good conference. I will certainly follow everything online. Bye for now from Denmark.
Thank you, Elspeth. Actually, the pandemic has made all of us realize how important the classroom teaching is, and we really hope all of us, the teachers, the students, and the parents, cherish our wonderful school life. 非常感谢伊莎贝斯校长的分享，希望我们每个人都享受学校生活带给我们的美好。接下来，让我们有请来自美国艾尔瓦州奥萨卡路萨独立学区学监罗素雷特、副校长杜威·浩布克给大家带来的报告：重新定义学习。Next speech is Redefining Learning by two speakers from Independence School District in Oskaloosa, Iowa, United States. Let's welcome Mr. Russell Wright, the superintendent, and Dewey Hopkins, the assistant principal.
Hi, everyone. I'm Russ Ryder, Superintendent of the Independence Community School District here in Independence, Iowa.
My name is Dewey Hupke, and I'm the Assistant Principal at the Independence Junior Senior High School.
Iowa is located in the upper Midwest of the United States. And Independence is actually located in the northeast corner of the state of Iowa. We pride ourselves in having outstanding facilities, both at the junior senior high and our elementary schools. You will also notice that in the picture in the center and above, we're a very rural area. We have a lot of farms. We have a lot of great farm land. We primarily have 2 or 3 crops, corns and beans, but we have outstanding families. You can see that we also have a wide variety of activities and athletics. We have an outstanding band program. So we're very proud of our community school, and we're very interested in sharing what we have to share with you on this redefining learning topic. The Independent School District is approximately 1,425 students. We have about 725 students at our junior and senior high, grades 7 through 12. We have about 600 students in our elementary, and with 100 students across our community in our preschool program. This year's topic, redefining learning. An interesting topic to say the least. If we want to talk about curriculum, curriculum is extremely important. It's important to provide opportunities for all of our students. The wider, the more curriculum you have to offer, to gauge the student's interest, the better. We have exploratories here at our junior high and middle school here at Independence. We have students who may enjoy computers. We may have students who enjoy technology. We have students who enjoy farming and working with their hands. We have students with a wide variety of interests, and we think that's extremely important. It's also important because at our juniors and our junior and senior classes, we have community college opportunities. And so a lot of our students will take college courses while still attending here at the high school. Teaching and learning, extremely important because we have a lot of professional development that we provide our teachers. Our teachers, we ask them to continually learn and get better, use different techniques, use different methods that they can reach out and hopefully their kids, their students learn more. And you try to teach the kids to their style of learning. Extremely important, and we spend a lot of time with our professional development. Assessments and evaluation. I will say that I don't think Mr. Hupke will say that he's an expert in the areas of assessments and evaluation, but we spend a lot of time on assessing our students, where they're at, and evaluating our staff as well as the kids, trying to continually improve what's being taught in the classroom, assessing what's being taught, evaluating it, and then looking to improve our teachers and all that they do. Probably the biggest issue that we've dealt with over the last couple of years is the online virtual learning. Due to the pandemic, we've had a lot of students who have been taking some courses and who missed school last year. This year, we are providing education here within the building, and we have very few kids who are at home learning online with their computers. What's interesting is we are looking at a lot of kids, though, who are struggling socially, emotionally, because of the pandemic, because of things that may have happened to their families, because of loss of jobs. And so there's a lot more stress on kids. There's a lot more stress on parents. We've implemented a process here a couple of years ago called Capturing Kids' Hearts. Our goal is to be more proactive than reactive to some of the struggles that these kids are sharing and what they're going through. So I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Hupke, and he's going to talk to you a little bit about our Capturing Kids' Hearts program here at Independence Community School.
So like Mr. Ryder had said, we have a lot of students like you, and we want all of those students to learn at their highest level. So we implemented Capturing Kids' Hearts so that we can make sure and have a better guarantee that our high-level students are achieving their great success. Our grade-level students, they would still achieve their successes. And then the struggling students, even though they're struggling, we still want them to improve, get better, and close the gap getting up to grade level. And in all this process, dealing with Capturing Kids' Hearts, the biggest thing that we feel we were trying to do is meet the social and emotional needs of our students. And we're going to go through a couple of things on how our staff was doing that. First of all, we had to redefine what students and staff and what the role of the staff member might be. The number one thing that we wanted our teachers understanding is we want you to focus on the student, each and every one of those students. And one of the ways that we did that was in Capturing Kids' Hearts is to help the teacher build that relationship, giving them some strategies. Number two, we wanted to give our students a strong sense of belonging. We want them to know that they are welcome here. We want them here. In fact, this building is here because of them. And so we want our students understanding you are the reason we are here. We want to help you be successful. We want to help you reach all of your goals and aspirations. And then the third one is we have to make sure that they feel physically and emotionally safe. We believe that and research says, when students feel physically and emotionally safe, they are going to be able to thrive in the classroom. And if you would think that steps of the learning take place 1 through 10, the most important part is step 0 to 1. That real strong foundational part that allows them to feel safe at school, and then the learning will take place. So in Capturing Kids' Hearts, we have a picture here in the top right. I don't know if we can move that or not, but the whole premise is this is a teacher meeting and greeting a student at the door. Thank you. And so they're actually just given a knuckle bump. It's another way that we say hello, hi, and with that knuckle bump, the teacher has a smile on her face. As you can see, the student, you can't see the smile on her face, but she was smiling when I took that picture as well. Because again, we have to have the students feeling safe when they're coming to school. They have to know their teacher is here for them. So that would be in this Excel model. I kind of got ahead of myself, but in that Excel model, this is the E. This is the meet and greet. And so teachers are encouraged to do this every day of every class period, meeting and greeting their students. Another thing that we've encouraged our staff to do is to affirm. When a student does something that is very positive, we want the adult affirming that behavior and saying good job and telling them what are they proud of them about. The welcome we've already talked about, and then modeling this. We believe that if adults model it with students, sooner or later, then the students start to see this and then they start to do it amongst each other. So it's just a great opportunity for us to teach them, but it's not academics that we're teaching them right now. It's about social and emotional. Then we get into the X, and the X is to explore. And if you view your classroom as a business and you are the owner, you are looking to the student, the customer, asking them, what do you need? How can I help you? What other things do you need to be successful? Another thing that we want them doing is conveying empathy. So when students come to school and they're sharing some of their things that we'll talk about here and good things, we want them to understand. We want our teachers to understand how our students are feeling. We want them to explore more about them and ask them open-ended questions and see if is there anything that they're not telling us that maybe we can read into and get them more help. The letter C in Excel is communicate. And when I say something to a person, 55% of what I say, or I'm sorry, 55% of my message is communicated through my body language. So if I have closed arms and I'm very rigid, that communicates that I do not really want to hear what they say. But if I stand there with open arms and a smile on my face, that's very important. The tone of voice that I use, 38% of what I say is used through the tone of voice. And then only 7% are the words that I choose. So you can see the number one thing that this teacher is communicating in this picture, body language. She has her hands down at her side, she has a smile on her face, and she's greeting this young lady. The E, the empower, we want to provide our students with skills so they know and they understand how to be successful, how to help others, how to achieve all of their potential. And then the L is the launch, and that is when I'm the teacher, I'm going to wrap up the lesson and I'm going to send the students out. I want them having something in their brain that says, what did we just do today? Or it might be when I am talking to them and I'm sharing a story about a person who's been successful, maybe that's what they're thinking about, is how can they be another successful person? So that's the Excel model of capturing kids' hearts. The historical data that we were finding, we strongly believe that students were coming to school and they weren't having their social and emotional needs being met. And over the course of the last 3 years of meeting those, you see some data here that really shows the success of capturing kids' hearts. And these are some office referrals, and we believe that a couple of things. One, if a student is not in the office because they're in trouble, they're in class, they're going to be learning. That's important. But two, we believe that these office referrals might have been, are going down because they are getting their social and emotional needs met. And so we're very excited about that. The defiance, insubordination, and non-compliance is just one area. And you can see in 2018-19, those are at 116, 2019-20, we're at 64. In 2020-21, we dropped down to 57. So we believe that capturing kids' hearts is making a huge difference. Some more historical data in just another couple categories. The disrespect, students showing disrespect, maybe because they didn't feel like they were connected to their teacher. It's very difficult to disrespect someone who you know cares about you and knows, and you know that they want you to be successful. Those numbers, again, 2018-19, they were at 33. 2019-2020, they went up a little bit to 35, but then last year they dropped dramatically by 26 office referrals. So we're very excited about that. And then the overall indicators that I really believe that the Capturing Kids' Hearts initiative is really starting to take hold and changing what Mr. Ryder had said earlier, the culture and the climate of our building. 2018-19, we were up at 422 office referrals. 2019-20, we dropped 122 of them. And then last year we dropped another 60. So we really believe the staff understanding more about their students is making an impact, but the students feeling like they are connected to school, they have an important role to play in school, is another reason why we really believe that this is being successful. And then finally, we just believe that the continued success of learning when students have their social and emotional needs being met is largely due to the implementation of Capturing Kids' Hearts. And we're confident that we'll continue to meet those social and emotional needs of our students. And therefore, our students will be able to learn. Like we said, the high learners are going to continue to learn. Those grade level students will continue to learn, and the low struggling students are going to learn, all at their levels of expectation and meeting their goals and their aspirations. So appreciate your attention to this, and wish you the best. Thank you.
If there are any questions that you might have, feel free to contact us. The website was, I believe, on the first or second screen, and we'll be able to provide our contact data to the Sheshalong Foreign Language School. We appreciate them and the symposium that they provided to allow us to share our ideas. We thank you for your attention.
Thank you for sharing your Capture Kids' Hearts program. I can't agree with you anymore that when students feel physically and emotionally safe, they are going to be able to thrive in the classroom. 非常感谢罗素学监和杜伟校长分享的孩子们的心灵捕手计划。请大家铭记一心，当学生感到身心安全时，他们会在课堂上飞速成长。接下来，让我们欢迎俄罗斯圣彼得堡574中学校长马瑞娜·沃尔科娃女士、副主任亚娜·波普科娃女士和我们分享关于线上线下学习的经验。The last speech entitled Online and Offline Learning by two speakers from St. Petersburg 574 Middle School in Russia. Let's welcome Ms. Madina Volka, the principal, and Ms. Yana Popkova, deputy director.
Дорогие друзья, мы приветствуем вас из России, из Санкт-Петербурга. Школа 574 сегодня с вами. Во-первых, спасибо огромное нашим дорогим китайским друзьям за возможность встречи, пусть и виртуальной, и обмена опытом. Во-вторых, я всем вам желаю крепчайшего здоровья. Пусть скорее закончится эта неприятность, разделяющая наши страны. Очень надеюсь, что скоро мы сможем встретиться реально, глаза в глаза. Будьте здоровы и счастливы.
Hello, dear colleagues. So today we have a special speech for our great meeting, online and offline learning. Online learning came into our lives quickly and rather painfully in 2019. So we have used elements of online learning before. The online learning system was working in 2012. This process applied to ill children and children with special needs. The teachers were talking to the students via Skype, explained the material and listened to oral answers. The students sent written works to the teacher's email. It is important to notice that the teacher was allocated a separate working time for such children. This was not combined with the studying process of the entire class. Then we have used elements of distance learning on those days when the school was closed for quarantine due to the flu, or if school days were lost due to holidays in 2016. It had happened only 3 times. We choose a literary work that the children had already known. For example, we had selected the story The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Each teacher prepared questions on his subject based on the story. The biology teacher asked about the cultivation of roses, and physics and astronomy teacher asked about the planets, and the music teacher asked about the music for the play The Little Prince, so on. There were tasks on ecology, questions about social problems, and much more. The students selected material for answers on the internet and made a presentation due to the subject which was the most interesting to him or her. This form fascinated students, expanded their ranges of interests, and helped them determine their future professional preferences. Some teachers have their own groups in social networks and training sites where they communicate with students on their subject, provide additional educational material, interesting links, and subject tests. Does all this mean that entering into online studying was painless for us? No, it doesn't. We faced with a number of problems. Firstly, not all teachers were ready to work in such online format. This not standard form of lessons had become a big problem, especially for older teachers. We overcame our lack of skills by assigning a mentor to everyone who needed it one. Usually, experienced teachers become mentors of young colleagues, and then it was the opposite situation. Young teachers showed how to work in Zoom, how to record video lessons, how to systematize and process feedback received from students. Secondly, there were serious administrative difficulties. We had to think out the schedule so that the health of children did not suffer. Then we figured out the organization of feedback so that the teacher did not have to check the students' work at night. We provided for constant communication with parents and children so that no one was excluded of the online learning process. We solved all the problems that seemed as unsolvable, one in a couple of months, but it required serious expenses. First of all, it was time, of course. Thirdly, not all children were ready for online learning. At first, only a half of the children in the class were connected to online lessons. Someone could not connect to the broadcast on their own. Someone was fond of daily routine or games, so they forgot about the lesson. Someone just fell asleep after their parents left for work. Gradually, the situation improved, but some teachers still had to call on the phone and ask to connect to the lesson. There were difficulties in extended families. If there are 3 or 4 children in a family, they need to participate in a lesson at the same time, but the family has 1 computer or 2 rooms, so the situation becomes unsolvable. And what if parents also work from home? The school was ready to help. School laptops or tablets were given to the family for temporary using at the request of parents. It was nice to realize that business representatives supported the schools. Several large computer companies donated tablets to schools, which were handed over to families in need of additional equipment. But how the children shared room space? We can only guess about this. Perhaps someone had to attend the lesson sitting on the balcony or in the bathroom. How was the online learning organized? Each teacher held at least 2 lessons a week via the Zoom platform, which allows to see the student, ask him direct questions, and get answers. In addition, the teachers recorded video lessons where they explained the new material. Also, PE teachers organized video exercises with the children. The third format was the links to free online resources on the subject for additional information. The fourth one was the distribution of tasks according to the textbook, which the students worked independently. Knowledge control was carried out in several formats. These were online tests, written messages, and essays on a given topic, as well as control works that were conducted on the Zoom platform. During the online learning period, special attention was paid to the psychological support of children who found themselves in isolation. An hour of the class teacher was held every 2 days. A class teacher is a teacher who not only helps to organize the educational process in the classroom, but also knows the character of each child, helps the student in self-determination, supports him, her, and teaches him to live in a team. During this period, the class teacher faced a difficult task of understanding whether everything is fine with the child, how he coped with the studies, whether he felt lonely. Classroom teachers also used a different format of communication using social networks through Zoom and sometimes through telephone calls. Also, a school psychologist was working during the period of separation. Special posts were published regularly in psychological support of students. Online consultations were held as well. But the most interesting things perhaps were the online events held in the school's group on the social network. There were drawing competitions and poetry contests when everyone could send their own drawing or recording on their speech on a given topic. And all the group members voted for the winner. School librarians posted interesting information about books, and then the children admitted that they enjoyed reading them. Also, the teachers of additional education posted interesting information in their tutorials. But most of all, the children liked the challenges. For example, related to what they do at home. For example, as a form of a challenge, the students congratulated with pleasure their teachers with their birthdays. We have been working in full-time format since September 2020. Most of children go to school. Naturally, we observe all sanitary measures. We check the temperature at the entrance of the school, wear masks and use antiseptics. The schedule is composed in such a way that children from different classes meet with each other as little as possible. In addition, our government has given parents the right to choose. If they want the child not to attend school but to study at home, they can choose the mixed learning format. In this format, the child is taught at home independently with the help of parents. Textbooks and various online educational platforms help him. But the student writes control or tests, which is evaluated by the teacher every 2 months. To tell the truth, there are very few families who have chosen this format, less than 1% of students. The previous academic year was not easy for each of us. The main disappointment of this year is the understanding that the knowledge of our students after the distance format is not as good as it was before it. At the same time, we understand that life will not be the same anymore, and we will not be able to give up completely online learning. The new academic year is an attempt to combine the best of online and offline learning. We still work and live with the restrictions in the new academic year, but experience allows us to build studying process in a new way. We keep an active extracurricular life in social networks. Teachers use online platforms to make homework more interesting and diverse. And we will integrate children who will be absent from school for a long time for objective reasons into the lesson in an online format. The most interesting achievement for us of online studying is the interaction with our foreign friends. We held 2 video conferences with students from France and Italy, made a collective project with friends from Galicia and Shanghai, and we are pleased to invite you, friends, to support people's diplomacy through online interaction. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon. Bye.
Thank you, Madina and Yana, for sharing your experiences about the formats and contents of online and offline learning. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us in the morning forum of the 6th Annual Conference of Global K-12 Education Research Association. This afternoon, we will have more speeches given by experts and principals, teachers from the UK, Costa Rica, the USA, Brazil, France, Italy, and Qatar. 谢谢俄罗斯圣彼得堡574中学2位校长的分享。尊敬的各位专家、各位同仁，通过今天上午2位教授的主旨报告、5位校长的实践经验，相信大家对重新定义学习都有了自己的思考。今天下午，来自英国、哥斯达黎加、美国、巴西、法国、意大利、卡塔尔7个国家的14位专家、校长将会给我们带来更加精彩的报告。让我们继续云端相见，续写精彩。